Hello and welcome to Network News. Today we're discussing the recent announcement that the Scottish Government is looking into ways of running Caledonian Sleeper services through the Channel Tunnel and into mainland Europe. It was part of the SNP's manifesto for the 2026 Scottish parliamentary election, which they since went on to win. However, in the months since, we haven't heard anything further about it until now. On the 4th of August, it was revealed that a working group had met for the first time to deliver a high-level feasibility study, with this group being made up of representatives from Transport Scotland, Scottish Rail Holdings and Caledonian Sleeper. Together, they will examine the technical and commercial implications for this new service before presenting their findings to ministers later this year. This isn't the first time a sleeper train between Scotland and mainland Europe has been proposed though. Following the opening of the Channel Tunnel in the 1990s, plans were developed for a service known as Nightstar, which would have run to a variety of locations in both Britain and mainland Europe, including a route from Paris and Brussels in Europe to Glasgow and Edinburgh in Scotland. This plan was the closest we ever got to a sleeper train on this route, with a dedicated new fleet of carriages built by Metro Camel throughout the 1990s in order to operate the service based on the Mark IV design, but with modifications in order to meet the safety requirements for the Channel Tunnel. In July 1997, however, the project was scrapped over concerns about its commercial viability, and the carriages that were built for it were subsequently sent off to Canada, where they have since been operating services with Via Rail. More recently, in 2023, a French company called Midnight Trains announced their intention to run services between Edinburgh and Paris, as well as various other routes throughout Europe. However, this never led anywhere either, and the project was officially abandoned in May 2024. For this latest attempt to get services up and running, the feasibility study will need to focus its attention on several potential barriers to entry that the new service will need to overcome. Firstly, and perhaps the most obvious, is the question around border control. Since the UK is not part of the European Schengen area, it means that passport checks are required for anyone wanting to travel to or from the mainland. Additionally, these checks aren't permitted to be carried out on the train, so must take place in a proper terminal before crossing the border. Previously, a limited number of direct Eurostar services from the south of France got around this problem through a workaround known as the Lille Shuffle, whereby everyone who had boarded the train without going through customs further south had to get off the train at Lille Europe, traverse the customs and security checks, and then reboard the same train. It may be technically feasible to introduce a similar system where people would go through the necessary checks in London at either St Pancras or Stratford International, but given that it takes in excess of 4 hours to travel between Scotland and London, it would likely mean waking everyone up in the middle of the night, which is far from ideal. Therefore, it seems almost certain that new facilities will be needed somewhere in Scotland. As part of requiring international border facilities, it also needs to be possible to seal off a platform from the rest of the station to prevent people sneaking in and boarding an international train without first having gone through the necessary checks. In London and Paris, they've got around this problem through the use of dedicated international platforms which are sealed off from the rest of the station, but this doesn't have to be the case. In Rotterdam, the international platform used by Eurostar trains to London is also used by domestic trains. They achieve this by sealing off the platform from the rest of the station when being used by trains to the UK, and then unlocking it again when used by other services. Given the new sleeper service from Scotland would likely only be running once per day, it makes sense to implement a similar solution here rather than locking a platform out of use for the entire day. With that in mind, one of the things they'll likely be investigating as part of this feasibility work is locating a station which both has platforms which can be sealed off from the rest of the station and has room for an international terminal. To that end, the obvious candidate is Edinburgh Waverley platforms 8 and 9, which are already separate from the rest of the station, being located on the outside of the main train shed, so can be sealed off with minimum effort and have room for an international terminal to be built on the car park adjacent to the station. Other obvious candidate stations, such as Glasgow Central, are much harder to work out how a platform can be sealed off and an international terminal added, though with some creative thinking, it may not be impossible. The second issue facing any new service between Scotland and Europe will be rolling stock. Stations in Britain, including Edinburgh and Glasgow, use the national standard platform height of 915mm. However, HS1 and the Belgian network use a lower platform height of 760mm, and the French high-speed network uses an even lower platform height of 550mm. As such, any trains operating this new service will need to be equipped with some form of retractable steps to deal with the difference in platform heights across the different networks. This isn't an insurmountable problem, but it does make it much harder to use an existing design, such as the Mark V's already in use with the Caledonian Sleeper. In addition to this, any trains running on this route will need to be able to meet the standards of both the French, British and potentially Belgian railway networks. This includes platform heights as discussed earlier, but also includes things like signalling systems, electrification systems and, crucially, loading gauge. Loading gauge refers to the space available around a train for it to fit through, including through tight tunnels and under low bridges. Britain's loading gauge is much smaller than most of Europe's, meaning that trains have to be custom built to fit our network. The combination of all these factors, plus the need to meet strict safety standards for the Channel Tunnel, rules out the possibility of using an off-the-shelf train design, which may be enough to kill the project in its tracks, as custom-built trains are much more expensive to order. Usually this can be offset by placing a sufficiently large order, but given that you'd likely only need a few trains to run a sleeper service, it means that the cost per unit could escalate very quickly, as you don't have the same economies of scale that comes from a larger fleet order. One other possible solution they may consider is to use some trains which already fit the specification. One option could be to ship the previously built Nightstar carriages back across from Canada, where they are set to be retired within the next few years. They would likely require extensive refurbishment and modernisation to be suitable for the service, but they would be compatible with the Channel Tunnel's safety rules, fit within the British loading gauge, and have retractable steps to deal with the difference in platform heights. Likewise, another option could be to use Eurostar's current fleet of Class 373s, which were also designed to operate on the British network and are also set to be retired within the next few years. Even if not using their power cars, just taking their carriages and refurbishing them could offer a cheaper solution than building a whole new fleet from scratch. The final problem, though, is one which affects any new Channel Tunnel service, that being the extremely high track access costs to use the Channel Tunnel. Another night train startup, Knox Mobility, has said it's not considering any routes to London for this reason. The costs are so high that it makes operating a profitable sleeper train through the Channel Tunnel nearly impossible, and so it'll either need to have extremely high ticket prices or require a high level of public subsidy, neither of which are desirable. Even if the problems with the customs facilities and the rolling stock can be overcome, this on its own may be enough to kill the project. So that gives you an idea of some of the challenges which would face a potential new Caledonian Sleeper service between Scotland and mainland Europe, as well as some of the ideas which the new working group may be exploring. We don't know anything about the details they're investigating at this stage, but the topics discussed in this video will likely be the biggest barriers they'll have to overcome. Given the high costs of building new customs facilities and acquiring suitable rolling stock, combined with the track access costs of using the tunnel, it seems that the odds are stacked against this plan, so I wouldn't be surprised if they conclude that it's too difficult and that the costs outweigh the benefits. But with enough political will, it may be technically feasible, so I really do hope this is able to move forwards. Of course, there's a long way to go before this even has a chance of happening, but we do know that the working group will report its findings to ministers later in the year, so if there are any further developments in the story, I'll be sure to provide an update, so subscribe if you want to see that. With all that said, what are your thoughts on the proposed Caledonian Sleeper service between Scotland and the European mainland? Might this be the time it actually happens, or will it go the same way as the previous failed attempts? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to Network News for more updates like this, and until next time, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in delivering high quality, independent analysis, consider becoming a channel supporter for as little as £1 a month, with a special thank you to our first supporter, Harrison Schnazel. Thank you very much.